The email arrived at 6:47 on a Tuesday morning. Yana Cole read it twice, standing in the middle of her apartment kitchen in her robe, her coffee going cold beside her. The subject line was clean and corporate. Disciplinary meeting 9:00 a.m. Mandatory attendance. The sender was Park Jae-hoon, Chief of Human Resources at Seon Capital Group. There was no explanation. There never was with these things, just the time, the room number, and the weight of something left unsaid pressing down on every word. She set her phone face down on the counter. She had been Han Do-yoon's executive assistant for 3 years. 3 years of 5 a.m. briefings and midnight filing deadlines. 3 years of managing a man who moved through the world like he had already calculated where everything was going to land before it fell. He was brilliant in the way that cut. Not unkind, exactly, but precise. Han Do-yoon did not waste words, did not waste gestures, and he did not once in 3 years, waste trust on someone he didn't believe had earned it. That was the part that made her stomach drop. She got dressed slowly, wore the charcoal blazer she kept for hard days, did her edges with the care of someone who understood that armor comes in many forms. By the time she stepped into the elevator of her building and watched the lobby shrink below her, she had already made a decision. She would walk into that room with her back straight. Whatever this was, she would face it standing. Seon Capital's headquarters occupied the top 11 floors of a glass tower in Midtown. Yana had walked through those doors hundreds of times and never once felt small inside them. She had learned early in her career that spaces like this, all steel and silence and money that didn't need to announce itself, were designed to make people feel small. She had decided not to participate in that. Park Jae-hoon was waiting for her in conference room B on the 32nd floor. So was the company's legal counsel, a woman named Baek Soo-yeon who always wore her hair pulled so tight it looked like a warning. And at the head of the table, arms crossed, jaw set in that particular way that meant he had already made up his mind about something, sat Han Do-yoon. He didn't look at her when she walked in. That told her everything and nothing at the same time. "Ms. Cole," Park Jae-hoon began, folding his hands on the table. "Thank you for coming in. We'll get straight to the matter. Last Thursday, proprietary documentation related to the Daesung merger documents that were classified at the highest level of internal clearance were accessed from your workstation at 11:23 p.m. and forwarded to an external server registered to a competitor firm, specifically to Cho Financial Group." The room was very quiet. Yana looked at Park Jae-hoon, then at Baek Soo-yeon, then, finally, at Han Do-yoon, who was still staring at the surface of the table like it owed him something. "I wasn't in the office last Thursday at 11:23 p.m., she said. "Your access credentials were used," Baek Soo-yeon said. "Then someone used my credentials, because I was not in the building." Han Do-yoon finally looked at her. His eyes were the color of dark amber when the light hit them at a certain angle, and right now that light was hard and flat and unreadable. She had spent 3 years learning to read this man across boardroom tables and through glass office walls. She had learned when he was tired and when he was merely pretending to be calm. She had learned that the stillness in him, the kind he wore right now, meant he had decided on something and was daring the world to change his mind. "Your badge logged an entry at 11:08 p.m., he said. His voice was even. "The access log for the classified drive shows your credentials at 11:23. The forwarding address was set up using your company email account as verification. That is 3 separate points of confirmation, Yana." It was the first time he had used her first name all morning. It landed differently than she expected. "I understand what the logs say," she replied, keeping her voice level. "I'm telling you that I was not in this building at 11 p.m. on Thursday. I was at my mother's house in Brooklyn. She had a health scare that afternoon and I took the Q train out at 4 and I didn't come back until Friday morning. My mother can confirm that. My MetroCard history can confirm that. Whatever those logs show, someone else was in this building using my name." The silence that followed was different from the one at the start of the meeting. Thinner, like something in the room had shifted its weight. Park Jae-hoon glanced at Han Do-yoon. Han Do-yoon said nothing. "Pending further investigation," Baek Soo-yeon said carefully, "we'll be asking you to take administrative leave. Full pay. We're not terminating your employment at this time, but you will not have building access until this matter is resolved. Yana nodded once. I'd like a copy of every log you just referenced. That's not standard. I'd like a copy, she repeated, quiet and clean, of every log you just referenced. If my name is on something I didn't do, I have a right to know exactly what I'm being accused of. Han Du-yoon's gaze moved to Park Jae-hoon. Some silent calculation passed between them, then Jae-hoon nodded. She walked out of conference room B 12 minutes after she'd walked in. She took the elevator down to the lobby, pushed through the glass doors into the sharp air of a March morning, and stood on the sidewalk while the city moved around her in all of its indifferent noise and motion. She did not cry. She had learned a long time ago that tears in the wrong place hand power to the wrong people. But she did stand there for a long moment, breathing, feeling the specific grief of being accused by someone whose good opinion had, without her fully realizing it, come to matter quite a lot. She took out her phone and called her sister. Mara, she said when the call connected, I need you to think, last Thursday night, what time did I get to Mama's house? A pause, the sound of Mara moving through her apartment. Yana, what's going on? Just tell me what time I got there. You texted me from the queue at like 4:15. You got there maybe 5-ish. You stayed the whole night. I picked you up in the morning before my shift. What happened? Yana closed her eyes. I'll tell you later, she said. Can you pull that text thread and don't delete anything? She hung up and stood there another moment. Above her, the glass tower of Sion Capital caught the morning light and threw it back at the sky in long, cold ribbons. Somewhere up on the 32nd floor, Han Du-yoon had already moved on to his next meeting. She knew him. He compartmentalized the way other people breathed, automatically, constantly, without thinking about it. He had filed her in the drawer marked asterisk resolved and turned back to the rest of the world. What he didn't know, what no one in that room knew yet, was that the security camera on the 32nd floor hallway recorded 24 hours a day. And the footage was still there. The administrative leave felt like wearing a coat that didn't belong to her. Anna spent the first day at home, doing what she always did when the world tried to knock her sideways. She made a list. Not an emotional list, not the kind where you write down everything that hurts and burn it in some therapeutic ritual her college roommate used to swear by. A factual list. Dates, times, locations, every piece of evidence she had that placed her in Brooklyn on Thursday night and nowhere near the 32nd floor of Sion Capital Group. Metrocard swipe. Q train, Atlantic Avenue Station, 4:19 p.m. Thursday, text to Mara. 4:14 p.m. sent from the train, call log. Her mother's landline, 7:32 p.m., 11-minute conversation with her aunt who had driven up from Philadelphia. Mara's pickup, Friday morning, 7:50 a.m., confirmed by Mara's building doorbell camera which caught both of them walking to the car. She laid it all out on her kitchen table like evidence at a crime scene, which she was beginning to understand was exactly what it was. Someone had committed a crime and built her name into the architecture of it. Carefully. Deliberately. With enough technical precision that 3 senior people at Sion Capital had sat across from her that morning and looked at her like she was something that needed to be removed. That kind of setup didn't happen by accident. That kind of setup required access. To her credentials, to her badge, to her company email verification codes. It required someone who knew her schedule well enough to choose a night when she would genuinely not be in the building, and who had enough knowledge of her personal life to know that a family health scare would pull her out of the city without much notice. She sat with that thought for a long time. Then she called Marcus Webb. Marcus was her cousin's husband, and more usefully, he was a former IT security analyst who now ran a small private consulting firm out of an office in Harlem. He owed her a favor. She had proofread his entire company proposal 3 years ago, line by line, at 2 a.m, the night before he pitched his first major client. He had never forgotten it. He picked up on the second ring. Tell me everything, he said after she'd explained the outline of it. Don't summarize every detail. She told him everything. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Okay, here's what I need you to understand. Credential theft at that level, badge cloning, email verification intercept, that's not a casual thing. Whoever did this had either direct physical access to your workstation at some point, or they had someone on the inside feeding them information. This wasn't external. This was close. Close. Same floor close. Maybe same department close. Anna stared at the list on her kitchen table. What about the security cameras? She asked. That's your cleanest play, Marcus said. Badge logs can be spoofed if someone has the right tools. Email verification can be rerouted. But physical camera footage from a building-grade system, that's harder to manipulate without leaving traces. If you weren't in that building, the cameras will show who was. The company controls the footage. They do. But if they're conducting a legitimate investigation, they're legally obligated to preserve it as evidence. And if you file a formal dispute, in writing, to HR and legal with your alibi documentation attached, they can't quietly bury the footage without serious liability. You force them to look at it. She wrote that down. One more thing, Marcus said, his voice shifting into something more careful. Hannah, if someone went to this much trouble to set you up specifically, they had a reason. Think about who benefits from you being gone. She hadn't let herself think about that yet. She thought about it now. The Dasung merger. She had been working on the due diligence documentation for 6 weeks. She was one of 4 people in the entire company with clearance to access the full file. The other 3 were Han Du-yoon, Baek Soo-yeon, and a senior analyst named Kevin Lim, who had been at Sion Capital for 8 years and who had applied for the executive assistant position twice before the company had offered it to Yana instead. She had always been cordial with Kevin. Professional. She had noticed once or twice that he lingered in conversations with Du-yoon a beat too long, performing a familiarity that didn't quite fit, like a man trying on a suit that wasn't cut for his shoulders. She had filed it away as office politics and paid it no further attention. She thought about it now with different eyes. She filed the formal dispute that afternoon. Certified mail to Park Jae-hoon. Email to Baek Soo-yeon. One clean, precise document with her alibi evidence attached, and a formal request for preservation and review of all security camera footage from the 32nd floor between 10:30 p.m. and midnight on the Thursday in question. Marcus reviewed it before she sent it. He said it was one of the most well-organized dispute letters he had ever read. She told him that was because she had spent 3 years working for a man who didn't accept imprecision. The irony of that sat with her for a while. 3 floors above her formal dispute, in the corner office with the north-facing windows that caught the skyline like a painting, Han Du-yoon was not as settled as he had appeared in conference room. Bhe sat at his desk that evening long after his team had gone home, the city laying itself out below him in grids of light, and he turned the morning's meeting over in his mind the way he turned every uncomfortable thing, methodically, without sentiment, looking for the structural flaw. He was good at removing sentiment from analysis. He had built a career on it. His father had raised him to believe that emotion was the variable that corrupted every equation, and for most of his adult life, he had taken that as a fundamental truth. He had watched other men in his industry make catastrophic decisions because they had let feeling override logic. He had promised himself he would never be that man, and yet. He kept returning to the moment Yana had looked at him across that table. He had expected defensiveness, panic, the scrambled, over-explaining energy of someone caught doing something they knew was wrong. He had seen that before in employees, in partners, in people who had tried and failed to deceive him. He knew what guilt looked like when it was trying to hold itself together in a corporate conference room. That was not what he had seen. What he had seen was something quieter and more devastating. She had looked at him the way people look at someone they trusted, who has just made clear that the trust was not mutual. Not rage, not desperation, just a clean, steady recognition, the look of someone recalibrating what they thought they knew about another person. It had stayed with him all day in a way that the actual allegations had not. He pulled up the security system on his private terminal. As CEO, he had direct administrative access to the building's camera archive. He had not looked at it this morning because the log evidence had seemed sufficient. 3 points of confirmation. He was a man who dealt in data, and the data had told a clear story. But data could be constructed. He had built enough systems in his life to know that data could be constructed. He typed in the access parameters. Thursday, 32nd floor. 10:30 p.m. to midnight. The footage loaded. He watched the hallway outside the executive suite in grainy, time-stamped silence. The corridor was empty at 10:30. At 10:41, the cleaning crew passed through with their cart, 2 people, neither of them Yana. At 10:58, someone stepped off the elevator. Han Du-yoon leaned forward. The figure moved quickly, head angled slightly down, wearing a dark jacket with the collar turned up. The build was wrong for Yana, narrower in the shoulders, different in the gait, moving with the clipped, deliberate stride of someone who had rehearsed this. The figure used a badge at the executive suite door. The door opened. At 11:04, the figure moved to the workstation at Yana's desk, sat down, and began working. At 11:31, the figure stood, wiped the keyboard with what appeared to be a cloth, and left the way they had come. Han Du-yoon paused the footage. He sat very still. Then he zoomed into the frame from the internal suite camera, the one mounted above the door, angled slightly downward, that captured a wider view of the workspace. He moved the timestamp back to 11:06, when the overhead lighting had caught the figure at a slightly different angle. The face was partially obscured, but not completely. He recognized the jawline, the slight tilt of the head when concentrating, the particular way the left hand rested flat on the desk while the right hand worked. He had sat across from that person in meetings for 8 years. His chest did something complicated that he did not immediately have a word for. It was not quite anger, though anger was in there somewhere. It was the specific, sickening feeling of realizing that you almost destroyed something real because you were so certain of your own analysis that you didn't think to question the foundation it was built on. He picked up his phone. He called Park Jae-hoon first, then Baek Soo-yeon. Then he sat for a long moment, looking at the paused frame on his screen, before he scrolled to a contact he had never called outside of working hours in 3 years of working together. He stared at her name. Then he put the phone face down on his desk. Not yet. There were things that needed to be done correctly before he earned the right to make that call. He understood that much. He just wasn't sure, for the first time in longer than he could remember, that doing things correctly was going to be enough. Kevin Lim was escorted out of Sion Capital Group on a Wednesday morning. Han Du-yoon did not watch it happen. He had given specific instructions that the process be handled by security and HR without theatrics, without the kind of public unraveling that turned a professional matter into a spectacle. He was not interested in spectacle. He had never been interested in spectacle. What he was interested in, what he had been sitting with for 4 days in a way that was becoming increasingly difficult to compartmentalize, was the fact that he had looked at a woman who had given him 3 years of exceptional, uncompromising loyalty, and he had believed the worst of her without asking a single question that mattered. The investigation had moved quickly once the footage was in Baek Soo-yeon's hands. Marcus Webb, whom Yana had mentioned in her dispute letter as a consulting reference, had been right about everything. Kevin had cloned her badge during a fire drill 6 weeks prior, when the executive team had briefly left their access cards on their desks during an evacuation. He had intercepted her email verification by installing a passive logging tool on her workstation during a period when she was traveling with Du-yoon for a conference in Singapore. He had chosen the Thursday night deliberately, after overhearing a phone call she made from the corridor, the one where she told her sister she was heading to Brooklyn because their mother wasn't well. He had planned it across 6 weeks. He had built it carefully, detail by detail, the way you build something when you have convinced yourself that you deserve something the world has withheld from you. When investigators sat across from Kevin in a room on the 28th floor, he had not denied it for long. There was something almost relieved in the way he finally spoke, the exhausted unburdening of a man who had been carrying a constructed version of himself for so long that the weight had become unbearable. He had wanted Du-yoon's attention, his regard. The specific kind of recognition that he had watched Du-yoon extend to Yana naturally, instinctively, the way some people extend warmth without thinking about it, and which Kevin had spent 8 years trying to earn through performance and proximity and had never quite reached. He had told himself the resentment was about the job title, about being passed over, about competence going unrewarded, but it was simpler and sadder than that. He had wanted to matter to someone who seemed not to notice he was there, and when that didn't happen, he had decided that if he couldn't have the recognition, he would at least remove the person who had it. Han Du-yoon read the full investigative report in one sitting. He read it the way he read everything, thoroughly, without skimming, following every thread to its end. When he finished, He set it down on his desk and sat with the particular silence of a man who has just seen a clear image of his own failure. He had prided himself on reading people accurately. It was, in his private accounting of his own abilities, one of the things he did well. He understood motivation. He understood the architecture of how people behaved under pressure. He had built an entire career on the ability to look at a situation and identify what was real beneath the surface of what was presented. And he had looked at Yana Cole, a woman whose record over 3 years had not produced a single incident of dishonesty, a woman who had protected his schedule and his confidence, and on more than one occasion, his reputation from his own worst impulses toward overwork and isolation. And he had believed a constructed lie in under 20 minutes. Not because the evidence was so overwhelming that no reasonable person could question it, but because he had never, not once, looked at what he actually knew about her and weighed it against what the logs were telling him. He had treated her history with him as irrelevant data and treated the logs as fact. He had been so committed to his own analytical certainty that he had skipped the most fundamental question. Does this fit the person I have watched operate with integrity for 3 years? It did not fit. It had never fit. He had just not thought to ask. He picked up his phone on a Thursday afternoon, 11 days after the meeting in conference room B, and he called her. She picked up on the 4th ring. Her voice was even. Not cold but careful, the way you are careful with something that has recently caused you pain. MS. Cole, he said, and then stopped. He had prepared what he intended to say. He had, in the privacy of his office, actually written it out, not a script exactly, but a framework. The facts of the investigation. The conclusion. The formal offer to reinstate her position with a written apology on company record. He was prepared to be thorough and precise and professional. He said none of it. I was wrong, he said instead. I looked at logs and I did not look at you and I was wrong. A silence on the line, not hostile, something more complex than hostile. Know about Kevin, she said quietly. HR contacted me yesterday. Then you know the full account. I know the facts, she said. That's not the same thing as knowing what happened in that room. He absorbed that. No, he agreed. It isn't. Another silence. Outside his window, the city moved in its constant, indifferent way, and he was aware. In a manner he rarely allowed himself to be aware of things that had no immediate strategic function, that this moment was one he could handle well or handle poorly, and that handling it poorly would be a specific kind of loss he was not willing to accept. I would like to ask you to come back, he said. Not because the company needs you to come back, though it does, because I am asking you, personally, to consider it. If I need time to think about it, then you take the time. If I decide not to come back, a pause, he looked at the skyline. Then I will understand that I created those conditions, and I will respect your decision. She didn't answer immediately. He had learned, over 3 years of working alongside her, to let her silences finish themselves. She thought before she spoke. It was one of the things he had always, without ever saying so, deeply respected about her. Come in Monday, she said finally. I'm not promising past Monday, but I'll come in. Thank you, he said. And then, because he had been raised in a culture that treated gratitude as something to be demonstrated rather than announced, he added, I mean that without qualification. She came in on Monday. The 32nd floor was the same as it had always been. The low hum of the ventilation system, the particular quality of light through the north-facing windows in the morning, the smell of coffee from the executive kitchen that someone always started before 7. Her desk was exactly as she had left it. Someone had placed a single plant on the corner of it, a small succulent in a clean white pot. No note, but she knew who had put it there, because she had mentioned once, in passing, 14 months ago during a long transcontinental flight, when they had both been too tired to maintain the professional distance that usually governed their conversations, that she kept killing houseplants because she always forgot them, but that succulent survived neglect. He had remembered that. She sat down at her desk, turned on her monitor, pulled up the morning briefing. Han Du-yoon arrived at 7:12, which was his standard time. He walked through the floor the way he always walked through the floor, with the particular focused quiet of a man who was already 3 steps into his day before he had physically arrived at it. He paused at her desk. They looked at each other, not the way they had looked at each other in conference room B, across a table loaded with accusation and hurt, just directly, plainly. The way two people look at each other when the pretense has been stripped away and what is left is something truer and more fragile and more worth protecting. "Good morning, Miss Cole," he said. "Good morning, Mr. Han," she replied. He nodded once and moved toward his office. At the door he stopped, his back still to her. "The Dasung file has been restructured. There are sections that need your review before Friday, when you have a moment." "Have it on your desk by noon," she said. He went into his office. The glass door closed behind him, and Yana Cole turned back to her monitor, and the floor hummed around her, and the city moved outside the window, and somewhere in the space between what had almost been destroyed and what had quietly, carefully survived, something had shifted. Not back to what it was before. Forward. Into something harder to name but more honest than what they'd had. The camera on the 32nd floor hallway recorded it all, as it always did. But some things don't need a recording to be true. They just need two people willing to stand in the wreckage of a misunderstanding and choose, with full knowledge of the cost, to keep going. That is not a small thing. It never was.